Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Caitlin Burke.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. It is day 3 of controversial nuclear talks with Iran. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been working with negotiators in Switzerland. They're trying to work out a deal to eliminate Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief as an end of March deadline looms.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the U.S. is on the verge of making a bad nuclear deal with Iran. He sent that message to a joint session of Congress, but President Obama and dozens of Democrats didn't want to hear the warning. CBN's David Brody reports from Washington.
The Prime Minister of Israel, His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu.
Applause and criticism greeted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before a controversial appearance in front of Congress. More than 50 Democrats stayed away, some because of upcoming elections in Israel, others because they felt Republican leaders snubbed the White House by inviting the Prime Minister without any notice. President Obama didn't even watch the speech. This didn't help the rocky relationship between the two leaders. But the Prime Minister took the high road, opening with praise for the president.
Some of what the president has done for Israel might never be known because it touches on some of the most sensitive and strategic issues that arise between an American president and an Israeli prime minister. But I know it, and I will always be grateful to President Obama for that support.
The main tension deals with Iran's nuclear program. In leading the negotiations, the U.S. is pushing to downgrade but not eliminate Iran's ability to make nuclear weapons. Netanyahu told Congress it's the wrong strategy.
This deal has two major concessions. One, leaving Iran with a vast nuclear program. And two, lifting the restrictions on that program in about a decade. That's why this deal is so bad. According to the deal, not a single nuclear facility would be demolished. Thousands of centrifuges used to enrich uranium would be left spinning. Thousands more would be temporarily disconnected, but not destroyed.
The White House has repeatedly said that they want a nuclear-free Iran. They just think that negotiations are the way to get there. Yet even White House officials admit that an actual deal with Iran on nuclear weapons is 50-50 at best. But after the Prime Minister's speech, the president questioned a lack of solutions on Netanyahu's part.
On the core issue, which is how do we prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, which would make it far more dangerous and would give it scope for even greater action in the region, the Prime Minister didn't offer any viable alternatives.
Add to the speech White House concern that Congress might pass additional sanctions against Iran. The negotiations are at a sensitive stage, and this strong argument couldn't come at a worse time for deal makers.
If anyone thinks this deal kicks the can down the road, think again. When we get down that road, we'll face a much more dangerous Iran, a Middle East littered with nuclear bombs, and a countdown to a potential nuclear nightmare.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz says the president's role of pacifist-in-chief is chiefly to blame for Israel's situation.
Do you believe he dislikes, first of all, Netanyahu? Do you believe he has antagonism towards Israel?
Undoubtedly. It is heartbreaking. This administration has been the most hostile U.S. administration to Israel in the history of our country.
And Cruz has harsh words for Democrats who didn't show up for the speech.
David, I'll tell you this. No friend of Israel would boycott a speech by the elected leader of Israel, particularly at a time of enormous peril.
Those words, enormous peril, are ones echoed by Netanyahu. His people remember the Holocaust, and he's determined to never let anything like that happen again.
I can guarantee you this. The days when the Jewish people remained passive in the face of genocidal enemies, those days are over. I can promise you one more thing. Even if Israel has to stand alone, Israel will stand. But I know that Israel does not stand alone. I know that America stands with Israel. I know that you stand with Israel.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
The Islamic State released 4 more Syrian Christian hostages from the more than 200 they kidnapped last week in Syria. The Assyrian rights group Demand for Action and the Assyrian Charitable Association say the reasons for their release were unclear. Earlier this week, ISIS released 19 Christian hostages after they paid an Islamic tax imposed on non-Muslims. At least 190 Assyrian Christians remain captive.
Obamacare is back before the Supreme Court today, and some believe a ruling against the administration could mean the beginning of the end for the Affordable Care Act. Dale Hurd has the story.
4 words could doom the entire 2,000-page Affordable Care Act on a technicality. Those words, to be argued before the court today, are established by the state. Opponents say the law required individual states to create their own health care exchanges. But 34 states chose not to do that. So the Obama administration created a national health care exchange. If the court decides that violates the law, 5 to 7 million Americans might not be eligible to get subsidies from the federal government to buy health insurance.
If the court were to rule that the administration's interpretation was wrong, then there are 34 states where people would no longer be able to get these tax credits for buying coverage on the exchange.
And if those subsidies go away, experts say Obamacare will crumble because only the sickest people would participate in the exchanges. Premium rates would skyrocket, and Obamacare could go into a death spiral. Lawyers for the government will argue against a literal interpretation of the law, saying the intent is clearly to help people in all 50 states get affordable health care coverage.
There's breast cancer in my family, so for me it was very important to get the affordable care so that I could go and get all of my preventive care.
After narrowly surviving a constitutional challenge in 2010, the fate of Obamacare is once again in the hands of 9 justices. Some Republicans say either way, they'll keep working to repeal the law.
It's bad for patients, bad for the providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of them, and terrible for taxpayers.
This is just one more example of a law that has had all sorts of unintended consequences and adverse effects for all sorts of people.
The Supreme Court's decision is expected to come down in June. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton only used a personal email account for government business while she ran the State Department.
And the New York Times reports she never actually had a government email address. That could violate federal requirements for government officials to keep records of their correspondence. And Clinton's aides didn't have her emails recorded on government computer servers, which is required by law so other officials, Congress, and historians can access them if necessary.
While it is not illegal by any means to use a Gmail account or to use some other private account for the transaction of government business, it is a very unusual circumstance to solely use that account and then not to take steps during one's time in office to make sure that those email records are appropriately preserved.
A spokesman for Mrs. Clinton said she's been complying with the spirit and the letter of the law.
The Alabama Supreme Court has put a halt to same-sex marriage in their state. The justices are defying federal courts and ordering state probate judges to stop issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. 6 justices on the court ruled the U.S. Constitution doesn't alter the judge's duty to administer state law. Alabama law defines marriage as between only one man and one woman, and the justices say a federal court cannot tell them to change that.
Lawmakers in Charlotte, North Carolina voted against a measure that would add sexual orientation to the city's non-discrimination ordinance. Evangelist Franklin Graham says the city council made the right decision, telling the Charlotte Observer he's offering a big thank you to the council members who stood against this proposition. Gay rights groups are condemning the vote, saying it moves the city backward, not forward, and shows a continued lack of commitment to fair treatment of all its citizens and residents. The vote took place after hours of emotional debate. 120 people signed up to speak either for or against the measure.
City leaders in Ferguson, Missouri are preparing to respond to charges of racism. A Justice Department investigation says its police officers have routinely discriminated against blacks with petty citations, baseless traffic stops, and excessive force. This investigation comes on the heels of the death of 18-year-old Michael Brown, who was shot by a white police officer. The civil rights investigation highlighted a, quote, pattern and practice of discrimination against African Americans.
Coming up, no rest for the winter weary. Another round of winter weather makes its way across the country and could break weather records. We'll explain why.
Another massive winter storm is moving across the U.S. today. At least 30 states are under winter weather alerts from Utah to Maine. Parts of the Midwest are already experiencing icing conditions. Tonight, the storm moves east. New York City is expected to get 6 to 8 inches. And hard-hit Boston could break its all-time record of 107.6 inches of snow. That record was set back in 1995.
It could be one of the greatest comeback stories in history.
The rebound of Motown. In December, the city of Detroit came out of the biggest municipal bankruptcy ever in America.
But as Charlene Aaron reports, it's not out of the woods yet.
In its glory years, Detroit made its name producing fast cars and that great Motown sound. When the city fell on tough times, the music stopped. Once home to 1.8 million, the city's population dropped by 60%, leaving nearly 80,000 buildings sitting empty. Collapsing under an $18 billion debt, the city filed for bankruptcy in 2013.
I've seen progress. I've seen streetlights come back on. I've seen new development happening. I see property values going up. There's more occupied structures.
In less than 2 years, that tune has changed, and some, like Lawrence Williamson with Midtown Detroit, feel Motown is on the rebound.
But being at the bottom was actually a good thing, because right after we sort of hit bottom and was declared bankrupt, that's when we started to get a lot of calls from outside investors, outside interest groups, saying, I'm interested in investing in Detroit.
That interest even extends to Midtown Detroit, once one of the city's roughest neighborhoods.
Over the last 2 years, since 2013, 2014, there's 100 new businesses have located in Midtown. 100 new businesses.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Quicken Loans founder and Detroit native Dan Gilbert has spent more than $1.6 billion fixing up his hometown. He's buying up vacant buildings and luring tech companies to set up shop. He not only updates properties, Gilbert has also moved his own employees into many of them.
He brought in not just his business, but all of his employees, who in turn needed housing, which in turn need consumer spending, which is restaurants, bars, grocery stores.
While there are signs of better days ahead for Detroit, many say a lot more work needs to be done, especially when it comes to jobs and the city's poor. Chad Audi of Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries says losing the bankruptcy label is just the beginning of the city's economic turnaround.
We still have a high number of homeless people who are on the streets of Detroit. We still have a lot of blight, so we don't hide that. But we're going in the right direction.
At the height of its economic struggles, officials made deep cuts in city services, including fire and police departments. Officer John Bennett has been a cop for 16 years. Back then, he told CBN News,
"We've lost on the police department 1,000 officers that haven't been replaced in the last 5 to 6 years."
Now he's cautiously optimistic.
And that movement is great, and it's good to see, but we got to find a way to bring that synergy to outside of Midtown and downtown and into the neighborhoods, and we have to be able to make everyone, those who live, work, and play here, safe at all times. You know, downtown and the Midtown area, like any major metropolis, those areas are probably going to strive. You know, they're going to be fine. But if we can't find a way to move that energy to the neighborhoods and get that growth in the neighborhoods and bring jobs to the people who are in the neighborhoods and make those people safe.
While it's good news that the worst financial crisis in Detroit's history is in the rearview mirror, it will take more than just money to move forward.
We are part of the revitalization because we work with people, and without people, you cannot revitalize anything.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Detroit, Michigan.
Up next, a harmless vice that's warping a generation, the hidden cost of porn addiction.
The pornography business brings in as much as $97 billion around the world each year. That doesn't even include all the pornography people can see for free.
Despite all of the evidence to the contrary, many people think there's no emotional cost to pornography. But as Paul Strand reports, they not only hurt themselves, they can bring severe pain to others as well.
Pornography has become so mainstream, much of society is starting to believe it's harmless. What you'll often hear from porn users is, well, I'm not hurting anybody. But the truth is, there are very real victims. For instance, girls forced to act in obscene productions against their will.
What was happening to me was a lot of violence and bondage and being raped and kicked and beaten.
Nadine, at this conference on sexual exploitation, told of how the man producing torture films starring her put her in an aquarium with a huge boa constrictor.
And then dropped the snake in on top of me and closed the lid. And he filmed me, my terror, which hadn't got anything to do with sex except that I was naked.
This blatant exploitation wouldn't happen if there wasn't such an X-rated demand. And these consumers often hurt the ones closest to them, like the wife of longtime addict Matt Russell.
It was just a constant companion of mine, despite marriage, despite children.
It really sunk me because I felt that he preferred just even the image of someone over me. And as a woman, that's a hard thing to handle. It finally got to a point where I just said, I'm done. I'm done with this, and we separated.
Kathy Dyer's husband, Greg, drove her to seek therapy to deal with his addiction and the affair that followed.
I had this gaping wound, and I knew that if I didn't get some counseling, I was going to hate men.
These husbands eventually broke free and both couples reconciled, joining a Lakeland, Florida church that tackles porn addiction head on. Kevin Conrad leads an accountability group there.
I have seen men lose jobs, careers, not just jobs, but careers. I've seen them lose families, lose children, lose relationships with parents and siblings.
Church counselor Trina Mewborn sees how that desire for the X-rated destroys marriages.
Just based on the couples that I've seen through the years, at least 50% of the couples that are coming forward have some type of struggle with either pornography or internet affairs or some type of sexual issue.
CBN News talked to Pastor Jay Dennis about the problems within churches.
Have men lost their jobs? Have men lost their wives over pornography?
Absolutely, and I hear it continually. I see it in the church. I see it among pastors.
Such as Tom Wolf, a youth pastor, whose life in the X-rated world led to a series of affairs.
And I was found out and obviously lost my job, lost my church, lost my youth pastor's job, and for a while lost my family.
Missionary Nick Ripken says so many young Christian men are now addicted, they can't be on the mission field.
95% of them are trapped in pornography. They got started at 11, 12, 13 years of age. They can't get out of them.
And you can see it in the numbers. The current ratio is 7 female missionaries for every male.
And we're going to stand before God as Westerner, as men, and say 2 billion people can die and go to hell so I can watch naked women on the internet.
And men aren't the only ones. Former addict Crystal Renault says 1 in 3 visitors to adult websites are women.
This is me at the age of 10. Just a few months before, I would find my brother's stash of porn in his bathroom that would catapult me into an 8-year addiction with pornography and sexual addiction.
Even with the actual visual pornography, women are being drawn into it by the droves.
Renault testifies how this takes people into darker and riskier places.
For women who struggle with porn, it is said that 80% of them will escalate their behaviors into in-person encounters.
Sometimes it leads to criminal behavior.
I know of educators who are viewing pornography in their classrooms. I know of educators that just simply are taking advantage of children.
In her research, psychotherapist Marianne Layden sees a consistent link between those who consume porn and those who commit sexual violence. And she talks about a frightening study of college males who used more and more pornography during their time on campus.
In their senior year, had higher scores as psychopaths. We are teaching our males to be psychopaths.
Some men declare the reason they're such lustful creatures is that's just who men are.
That is absolutely going against everything that Jesus has taught us. They can help it. They can choose against this.
Dyer says they know in their hearts they're wrong.
Why do you hide it from your wife? Why do you hide it from God?
It's not a problem.
Why do you hide it in your house from your kids? Because you know it's not right.
Nadine blames these addicts for what happens to women like her.
They don't know about the degradation that happens inside you, the tearing at your soul, the ripping out of your heart when you get filmed like that. And then to know that there are people, men, mostly men, but women that are gawking and staring and eyeing everything.
Pastor Dennis says viewers can change all this by imitating the godly man Job.
In Job 31:1, he said, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman.
And accepting Jesus Christ died on the cross to set men free.
So that we wouldn't have to be the way we are, that we could change, that we wouldn't have to give in to our sinful natures.
Some declare they cannot live without pornography. Well, it just isn't so. Truth is, no one in history has ever died from a lack of pornography. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Lakeland, Florida.
Could coffee actually be good for your health?
A new study finds drinking 3 to 5 cups a day could cut your risk of having clogged arteries. That could lead to a heart attack. That's the finding from a study from South Korea covering more than 25,000 men and women. But the researchers say more study is needed, and they are not willing to go as far just yet to say people should drink coffee to prevent heart problems. So drink up or don't drink up. Not sure.
That's it for now on CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care about most at cbnnews.com.
We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.